Yeah. No, it's good to see you all here today. Welcome. And last week we were talking about the Heart Sutra as we have been for the last few weeks, and I received a couple comments that these discussions of the Heart Sutra were um, getting somewhat heady and intellectualized, and which um, indicates to me that I'm not communicating the spirit of the Heart Sutra um, as well as can be. So I'll try to correct that over the next couple talks as we conclude the Heart Sutra. But I'll be interested in your ongoing comments as we go along. It was indicated at the very beginning by one of the participants here that this is a fairly advanced teaching for in Buddhism. It's advanced in some ways, and it's very simple in other ways. Um, but we'll continue on today with the next section and explore that. Now, the next sentence in the Heart Sutra, we'll be talking about a couple sentences here, but the next one is premised on a phrase at the beginning of the previous sentence, therefore given emptiness. So I'll just include that with the sentence so it makes more sense. Therefore, given emptiness, there is neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death, no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path, no knowledge and no attainment with nothing to attain. A bodhisattva relies on prajna paramita, and thus the mind is without hindrance. So there are references here, which some of you may recognize, to some of the early Buddhist teachings, the very fundamental Buddhist teachings of dependent origination and the Four Noble Truths. Um, some of you may be familiar with the teaching of dependent origination, but that's what this part of the sentence where it says, neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death, is sort of a collapsing of 12 different steps that the Buddha describes in the chain of sequence, the sequential chain that leads from ignorance to a cycle of suffering and distress, a causal chain. And we won't go through all of that. But basically, the Buddha is indicating that there is a cause for much of our suffering and distress, and that interrupting that causal chain can be beneficial in easing suffering and distress. I might give you just a really mundane example. Suppose that you're working on something at your desk, which is kind of tedious but needs to be done, and it's late afternoon, and you're trying to get it done before dinner. And you find that you need a document that's in the car. So you go out to the car and you see the document, but you also see that in one of the little pockets in the side door, there's a bag of trail mix. And a couple thoughts come to your mind. One is that I need to get that trail mix out of the car, otherwise it will attract mice, and the mice will eat the insulation off of wires in the car and cause an expensive repair. So there's some urgency in getting the trail mix out of the car, but also you have the thought of, I'm getting a little hungry, and a handful of trail mix would be just the thing. That sort of salty, sweet, crunchy chewiness would be very satisfying. And it would also serve the purpose of delaying a little bit, going back to this tedious task that I need to complete at my desk. So at that point, you have experienced contact with an object. You have seen an object, and it has aroused impulses. It arouses memories and impulses that are stirred up by that contact. And at that point, you can either take the trail mix and put it in the pantry and go back to your task and get it done so you can start fixing dinner, or you can open the bag of trail mix and grab a handful and start chewing on it. Well, you might recognize at that point that the most beneficial thing would be to just put it in the pantry and go ahead with your task, get it done, fix and enjoy your dinner, which will taste better if you haven't just had a handful of trail mix. Or you can give in to the temptation of getting a mouthful of trail mix. And if you interrupt the sequence on the way to having a mouthful of trail mix and just go back to your task, then the next time you are exposed to that contact and that subsequent impulse and temptation, it won't be quite as strong. Whereas if you give in to having a handful of trail mix, it will be fresher in your memory the next time you have a similar contact. So in this case, the Buddha advocates restraint, or inhibition of that impulse, and going about your business as planned and putting the trail mix in the pantry for a more suitable time. A very simple demonstration of dependent origination. And there are obviously more comprehensive examples, but that will do for now. And then the next part of the Heart Sutra, where they're talking about no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path, many of you will recognize that they're referring to the Four Noble Truths. The truth of dukkha, or suffering, or distress, the cause of suffering or distress, tanha, the thirst, desire, and the possibility for relief of that suffering, yes, and the path, the Eightfold Path, that the Buddha recommends to cultivate the wisdom, the knowledge, to interrupt the chain of suffering or interrupt the cause of suffering and thus relieve the suffering. So, is the Heart Sutra then saying that all of this is just to be ignored? All of this is just, to be completely, it's useless. I don't think so. The Heart Sutra is not suggesting that the models that the Buddha presents for suffering and the relief of suffering, dependent origination, the fourfold, or the Four Noble Truths. The Heart Sutra is not suggesting that these are useless. In the audience of the Heart Sutra, it's well known that these are useful. But the Heart Sutra is suggesting that these are incomplete and that at some point need to be set aside for something more profound, for something deeper. And then it goes on. There's no attainment. Oh, I'm sorry, there's no knowledge and no attainment with nothing to attain. Now, the Sanskrit word for knowledge that is used here is interesting. It's jnana, jnana, which is the same root as prajna. So they're saying no knowledge. In other words, set aside this knowledge in favor of prajna, that which is beyond knowledge or precedes knowledge, pra, before or beyond. No knowledge and no attainment or achievement or anything that you need to get. Suggesting that you already have it. With nothing to attain, a bodhisattva relies on prajna paramita, complete wisdom beyond wisdom. And thus the mind is no hindrance. So in this section of the Heart Sutra, contrary to what it may appear initially, Avalokiteshvara, the speaker here, is not saying, oh, the Four Noble Truths and this causal chain, this leads to that. You can, that's nothing. They're saying it's incomplete and will be helpful, useful, skillful means to get us to where we need to go, but don't stop here. Keep going to wisdom beyond wisdom. And the wisdom beyond wisdom that Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, is advocating is wisdom that includes compassion, that is infused with compassion. and compassion that is infused, that includes wisdom, such that essentially they are the same. And setting aside these notions, these concepts that can be useful, is necessary in order to exercise, in order to practice prajna paramita, wisdom beyond wisdom. So, in some sense, this is talking about being attuned, becoming aware of, recognizing the spirit of the law, and which is beyond the letter of the law. It's talking about the limitations of concepts and hence the limitations of language, because language is made up of concepts along with connecting phrases. So again and again during the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara is inviting us to rely on something that we already have, something that we can learn to recognize using the tools of language, using the tools of these fundamental Buddhist teachings. Prajna paramita, which could be interpreted, given the limitations of language, as love, unconditional love. So I think we'll stop there, and we will be going into breakout rooms. But I wonder if this discussion might bring to mind instances where either you or someone you've observed has relied on prajna paramita, because this is not some distant esoteric teaching. It's something we've all experienced, and something Avalokiteshvara is encouraging us to recognize and practice daily. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening today, and we'll go into breakout rooms.